You know, most people who suffer from self-sabotage come to me and say, "Why would I do that? Why would I mess up my own nest? You know, why would I be the one who strangles things just on the verge of success? How do I constantly turn the threat of success into the confirmation of disaster? It doesn't make sense to me." And of course, what they're doing is they're looking for a bed in the kitchen. Of course, it doesn't make sense when you're trying to find out why you are self sabotaging. If you look for a logical reason to self sabotage, there isn't one. Why would you? Of course, there's no reason why you would self sabotage. What we have to look is some other place. We've got to get out of the kitchen and start to look for where the bed might be. And trust me, we'll be lying in that bed. So, what is it? Well, it's the place where emotions are. So, all self sabotage is a consequence of buried emotions that we don't recognize because we spend our time listening to that voice in our head thinking this is 100% of what's going on in my head. It isn't 100%, it's about 10%, and the other 90% is busy finding ways to mess up and bring in a new and creative way of messing up something that should really be successful. So we've got to go to our emotions, particularly we've got to go to the buried emotions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some coaching with you right now. It's a pretty simple concept. I'm going to say three concepts to you. I'm going to outline three ideas just by saying them, just by saying the words. Sometimes it'll be one word, sometimes it'll be a couple of words. I'm going to name an object, not an object, a concept. And so what you need to do is, as I say them, wait and see what your body does. If you're suffering from one of these three things, your body alarm's going to go off. You know, your breathing will accelerate a little bit, your heart will skip a beat, you might get a bit breathless, you might just get distracted. Something will happen in your body to say that's the one. So here comes the three. Number one, self-sabotage is most often related to self-worth. So if you've got issues with self-worth, then that's going to show up in the form of self-sabotage. Number two, self-sabotage second most often shows up in the form of control, the need to make things happen the way that you want to them. And trust me, sometimes failure is a better option than success. And number three, self-sabotage shows up because we have a dose of what's called imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is when I have a victory, but I don't feel like I deserve it. So those three things, I'll say them quickly again if you're looking for the signals in your body: self-worth, control, imposter syndrome. Just check the body responses in you as I said that, and let's have a look at them in depth. Essentially, self-worth is something that we need to build, and essentially if you're self-sabotaging, then there's not enough self-worth. We don't need to know why, we don't need to know how, we don't need to where it came from, we don't need to figure out who did it to us or made it happen or any of that sort of stuff. What we need to know is, how do I improve my self-worth? Because, however it happened doesn't matter much compared to what do I do today? What do I do now going forward that's going to make my self-worth improve day by day going forward? Well, number one is to back your opinion. Number one is to say to yourself, I feel like having a coffee, so I'm having a coffee. Why? Because I'm saying you're worth it. Not number two, but another version of back yourself is to voice your opinion when it may not be accepted. In other words, it's as important that I am heard as it is for everybody else to be heard. It's kind of like a bit of a dumbass thing to do, is to shut myself down in exchange for a bit more self-acceptance. So back yourself means do the things that you want to do. Treat yourself every now and then, and when you're treating yourself, remind yourself this is a treat because you're worth it. Because what you're doing is you're working on that lack of self-worth by saying you are, and here is a demonstration of it. This is not going to work overnight, but trust me, over a period of time it is definitely going to work. It's going to bring you forward in a powerful way. Also, in the sense of building self-worth, have a look at confronting your beliefs about this lack of worth. Many people feel a lack of self-worth. I don't deserve success. I don't deserve my husband or my wife. I don't deserve these beautiful children or whatever. But how about we confront them? How about we look at those and say, is that really true that you don't deserve it? Are you really that bad a person? Or you're actually one of God's children? I mean, God or the universe. So are you actually perfect, but you feel that you're not? So we need to confront self-worth from the point of view of actively building it. Number two on the list was control. And the real issue is, what do you do about control there? Well, if you look at control, the reason that control gets involved in self-worth is, if we look at domestic violence, for example, Mary Smith, a victim of some bad person, gets out of there and then feels uncomfortable, ends up in another set of circumstances like that. And we say, why? You know, it's a dramatic illustration of self-sabotage, is to get back into a situation that we escaped. But sadly, it happens very, very often. It also happens for the person who's behaving badly. So that victimizer gets out of there and ends up victimizing the next person. They're just as trapped. So I'm trying not to lay blame anywhere, but use the illustration, because you see, for the person who is a victim of domestic violence, the one thing they do know is how to control it. They know how to cover up situations. They know how to not say things. And when it all happens and the disaster hits, they know how to plug in. They know who to ring. They know where to go. They know what to read. They know what to do to keep their life in order. They're panicking, but it's kind of like, I'm familiar with this and I know what to do. Whereas put me in a room where no one's going to hurt me and I don't really know what to do. So it's an issue of control. In other words, keeping things not too successful. So there's all sorts of examples of that. We need to practice letting go of things that we're hanging on to, because we're trying to control events in our past by going back over them and wishing they were different and rerunning the things in our minds. I should have said this, and I wish I said that, and I wish I did that, and I wish I went there. It's an attempt at control. It's nothing like control. None of these things are actually control, because if you look at it, we don't actually have control. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 minutes, let alone what's going to happen in the next 5 years or the next 5 months or whatever it is from that. So control is an attempt to be powerful. In other words, we think that if we can control things, then we can be powerful, and that the problem came from a lack of power. Certainly in the domestic violence situation, you can see how that would apply. So that's our second cab off the rank. Remember, we talked about self-worth and what you need to do to build it. Control, we talked about letting go. We talked about understanding we don't have control, and control is not actually an example of power. It's an attempt to get away from the fear of the unknown, because we feel like if we have control, then I don't suffer from the fear of not knowing what's going to happen next. And third cab off the rank was imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is pretty common. It's the idea that I had a success, but whilst everybody is praising me for the success and telling me how well I did, inside I actually feel like I kind of fluked it. And therefore, everybody who's saying that I did well, they don't recognise that I feel like an imposter. I feel like I only just arrived. And in fact, if you've had a victory, you have only just arrived. You know, it's a brand new thing. It's been with you for 5 minutes and everybody wants to tell you you're going to conquer the world. And of course, we can feel like, oh, I think I fluked this. I don't know that I got this out of skill or talent. Maybe this one was luck. So I feel like I'm an imposter. The way around that is to visualize success, because that way you can get used to it. In other words, if you close your eyes for 5 minutes, maybe half a dozen times a day, maybe once a day, whatever suits you, and you just close your eyes for 5 minutes and visualize reaching the goals and targets that you want to reach, then when you get there, it's going to be a familiar place and it's not going to be such a shock. Imposter syndrome is not that difficult to deal with. We just kind of got to practice before we get there, so that when we get there, it's not a shock to our system. Those three things, let me run through them again: self-worth, control, imposter syndrome. Work on those. You will change your life.